Hello, I'm Dr. Guy Hatchard of the HatchardReport.com. Our topic today is what is consciousness-based medicine? Leveraging the power of consciousness to heal ourselves and the world, an Ayurvedic approach. We published over 300 articles during the pandemic, mainly focused on the risks of biotechnology experimentation. There is no doubt that modern medicine is in a crisis and the world is at a crossroads. As research into biochemistry and genetics has probed deeper, it has come to understand that there are subtle triggers and predispositions to disease that biotechnologists believe could or should be corrected. Accordingly, novel medicines are being developed that edit fundamental biochemical and genetic processes in the physiology. Whilst biology is a separate discipline, we should not forget that nature is not separated into disciplines. It is a whole. In fact, there's a general principle in science that as you examine smaller time and distance scales, there are fewer laws and entities that govern a larger number of events and processes. You are proceeding, as you go towards finer time and distance scales, towards unity or wholeness. This inevitably increases the potential for multiple and diversified adverse effects of deeper interventions into human biochemistry. In other words, medical research and development is proceeding in the wrong direction. It is violating a fundamental law of nature. More invasive medicines will inevitably have multiple unanticipated and unwanted side effects. Modern medicine is a broken system. Nothing illustrates this fault line in modern medicine more than the pandemic years. It seems likely that COVID was the result of genetic editing in a laboratory. The vaccines certainly were. Whatever the cause, 5 years on, we are left with a legacy of excess deaths, immune deficiency, heart disease, cancers, and overcrowded hospitals. Not to mention the geopolitical instability that has grown alongside the pandemic. Given the impending sense of doom, at the Hatchard Report, we took a conscious decision a few months ago to focus on the solutions rather than the problems. So what are the alternatives? This talk will examine the personalized health effects of traditional Ayurvedic herbal medicine and deep meditation. But crucially, it will also summarize collective health effects that will reveal some characteristics of biofields and of collective consciousness. Ayurveda is an ancient science of health. Veda means knowledge. Ayurveda is the knowledge of long life. Ayurveda is a branch of the ancient Vedic tradition which applies a scientific or systematic approach to the subjective means of gaining knowledge. At the neglected heart of Ayurveda is the field of consciousness. Living in a house, we may forget about the foundations, but if the foundations are neglected, the house may crumble. The foundation of life is consciousness, which has its specific values and its universal aspect. Charak, the founder of Ayurveda, identifies the loss of connection with universal consciousness as the fundamental cause of all disease. This is known as pragya parad, mistake of the intellect. I was fortunate to spend many years working closely with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who devoted much effort to reviving and re-establishing methods to develop higher consciousness as the foundational approach of Ayurveda. In this talk, we will be outlining the findings of research and the promise of consciousness-based medicine. Unfortunately, modern science has sought to exclude consciousness from its explanations. If science means systematic, objective investigation, analysis, and explanation, it serves the purpose of life. It can uncover universal laws of physics and biology, etc. But if the aim of science is to deny the existence and relevance of consciousness and the subjective means of gaining knowledge, then according to the fundamental tenets of Ayurveda, it is creating disease. So much has been speculated about consciousness in philosophy for hundreds of years, but much of it is confusing. Yet we all have our subjective experience of life. It's an easily accessible personal reference point, which is all about awareness, feelings, and decisions. This is intimately familiar to us, but most people live life without realizing the need to understand and contact its fundamentals. On the one hand, the dry mathematical statement of scientific law. On the other, the emotionally charged roller coaster of life. So how do you reconcile these two apparently polar opposites? The mistaken scientific endeavor to exclude consciousness has failed spectacularly with the development of modern physics. There are 6 key ways in which consciousness entered into and occupied a central place in 20th century physics. Firstly, in 1905, Einstein's seminal paper on special relativity revealed that the speed of light is the same for all observers. Einstein highlighted the special relationship between the observer and the physical world of space-time. Secondly, the emergence of quantum mechanics revealed that measurement, and hence the observer, plays a key role in the evolution of physical states, which can even extend to backwards causation in time. Thirdly, quantum entanglements or memories of relationships between states ensure that new interactions between consciousness and matter can alter the state of distant matter in the universe. Fourthly, quantum cosmology explains the emergence of the universe itself as the result of the interplay between observer, observed, and observer-observed relationship, which can be quantified as information gathering and utilizing systems, which are described by the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. Fifthly, theories which aim to provide a completely unified framework for physical theory, such as string theory or unified field theories, rely on non-abelian mathematics, whose self-referral structure, it doesn't need anything outside of itself, is a defining characteristic of consciousness. Sixth, the laws of physics are symmetric as to the passage of time, yet a unidirectional arrow of time is our common experience. Thus, discussion of this arrow of time and the second law of thermodynamics often identifies orderly states with reference to an observer's preferences. This 6th entry of consciousness into physics makes the connection between physics and evolutionary theory. Living systems defy the second law of thermodynamics, increasing in order rather than disorder. In physics, we have the 4 fundamental forces: electromagnetism, weak interaction, strong interaction, and gravitation. But the whole thrust of physics is to unify them. In order to unify them, then we come across this self-referral character of natural law, which is the characteristic of consciousness. Consciousness, then, is the fulcrum point of physics. Physics is incomplete without a theory of consciousness. If modern physics has had to place a conscious observer at the heart of its theories, how has it even been possible for anyone with a scientific turn of mind to believe that a complete science of life, ecology, biology, physiology, neurology, genetics, and evolution can be formulated without an understanding and incorporating consciousness. Awareness is the defining characteristic of living organisms. Conscious decisions are at the cutting edge of evolutionary time. So what is consciousness? The fashionable assumption of genetic essentialism incorrectly lays most of human woes and achievements at the feet of DNA. But life doesn't begin with a DNA molecule. It begins with a whole cell. DNA cannot function without RNA, and RNA cannot exist without DNA. It's the whole cell that is a self-sufficient system. DNA is a part and whole system. The cell is a whole system which then multiplies and differentiates in humans to approximately 37 trillion cells in total, containing an almost inconceivable quadrillion atoms. That's 1 followed by 15 zeros. Yet we retain a single identity. No one in mainstream science knows how this happens, and very few appear to even care. We should conclude that consciousness is a field that spans all these atoms. A field is the closest scientific construct we can match with consciousness. But what sort of field? Consciousness is a field capable of sensing the collective and specific activity of a quadrillion atoms. Consciousness can range from the pinprick of a tiny insect to the feeling of awe as we look at the unbounded canopy of the night sky. Without doubt, consciousness is a highly coherent and uniquely rich field phenomenon. Just how coherent is apparent when we realize how much effort and precision our immune processes expend to keep the genetic heart of our trillions of cells intact. In each and every cell, around 70,000 DNA repairs are carried out every 24 hours. Cancers are conditions where the body fails to protect genetic uniformity. Preserving our genetic identity is paramount to our autonomic processes and our health. Heart transplant subjects have been known to take on the personality traits and habits from their donors, indicating a relationship between genetics and consciousness. Transplant patients, furthermore, are also required to take immune suppressant drugs to avoid rejection of foreign genetic material. Thus, it seems to be the case that maintaining the integrity of our consciousness and our personal identity relies on a uniform genetic content of our cells. Yet, the cutting edge of modern medical research is literally intent on cutting and pasting our genome and our epigenome. The millions of casualties during the pandemic, including both the COVID infected and the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, speak volumes on the risks and inherent pitfalls of the genetic approach to medicine. Gene interventions and vaccines breach the cell membrane and edit the uniform genetic command and control system in billions of cells in the physiology, literally editing our identity and impacting our immunity, as we have widely discussed in our posts at the Hatchard Report and Globe.Global. The sad truth is that our knowledge of genetic and internal cellular processes is nascent and limited. The risks of gene editing are unquantified, but already well known to scientific publishing as both significant and sometimes terminal. The complexity and diversity of the human microcosm is little understood. We don't really know in any detail how information in all its forms travels around between the cell membrane and the nucleus. The cytoplasm of a single cell contains around 40 million proteins. This is the bit that stands between the genetic intelligence and the function of the physiology, between the nucleus and the membrane. The information exchange in this mix occurs in at least 8 different ways. Chemistry. Cells constantly receive and send chemical signals and extract energy from the chemistry of food. Water. The quasi-crystalline structure of water and its capacity as a universal solvent are essential for inter- and intracellular communication. Electricity. Electrical signals are conveyed along the cell membrane and are often converted into chemical signals conveyed by small messenger molecules called neurotransmitters. EEG fields. Many factors substantially shape the extracellular EEG field, which modulates cooperative behavior of cells and extracellular signals. You can even apply an external EEG field to simple organisms and change their shape, or even the number of heads that they have in some cases. Shape. Shape is a fundamentally important molecular feature which determines the interactions with cellular receptors, ion channels, enzymes, transporters, and an array of other complex processes. Vibration. The transmission of information in cellular systems is believed to be based on emission and resonance of electromagnetic patterns in the infrared frequency range generated by the vibrations of molecules. Transcription regulation. Because RNA is the direct output of genetic information, a significant proportion of cells' regulatory capabilities are focused on RNA synthesis, processing, transport, modification, and translation. And genetic identity itself. Genes contain reference instructions to produce proteins which build the body and guide processes, including information transfer. And they also help to determine the development of inherited traits. These 8 objective properties of cells may be intimately linked with the functions of consciousness. In a parallel description of the fundamentals of life, the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 4, also describes life as 8-fold, with the 5 fundamental qualities of matter paired with the 5 senses, then the mind, the intellect, and the ego. Despite the misleading rough English translation into earth, water, fire, air, and space, when actually what is being referred to are fundamental qualities, the similarity with the above list of processes in the cell is striking. The Bhagavad Gita is an ancient Indian text whose content inspired some of the founders of quantum mechanics, including Einstein. The Gita is fundamentally a textbook of consciousness. It pictures consciousness as riding a chariot drawn by 5 horses, which are the 5 senses. Thus, consciousness is the fulcrum point of life, according to Ayurveda, and Ayurveda is a perspective on biology and physiology. An 8-fold nature, or prakriti as it is called in Sanskrit, is considered to be the functioning expression of universal consciousness, or Purusha. So cells appear to have structures and functions that are analogous to what Ayurveda considers to be the structures and functions of human consciousness. We are proposing here that each single human cell and whole collections of trillions of cells are reflections of universal consciousness. So let's delve more deeply into this. There is a natural 3-in-1 structure to life. Consciousness has the structure of the togetherness of observer, process of observation, and the observed. 3-in-1 structure. Cells have a 3-in-1 structure. The togetherness of the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the membrane. We've been schooled to think that DNA is a sort of standalone key to life, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't function outside of the cellular structure. In Ayurveda, the whole physiology is described by a 3-in-1 structure. That is Vata, Pitta and Kapha. Vata, we have transport or flow or intelligence. We have Pitta, which is transformation, energy or information, or intellect rather. And then we have Kapha, structural material systems in the body. So transport systems, transformation systems, and structural systems. A personalized consultation with a trained Vaidya using pulse diagnosis or Nadi Vigyan assesses the balance between these 3 Vata, Pitta, Kapha known as doshas, and then prescribes herbal preparations and other approaches to maintain or restore balance. Following a consultation, herbal recommendations draw upon a materia medica containing over 5,000 herbs, with advice about preparation, combination, and dose. There's a word of caution here. Ayurvedic manufacturers in India are being taken over by pharmaceutical companies who are substituting synthetic ingredients for natural herbs and cutting corners. It's important to go to authentic and tested and well-tested producers. In my book, Your DNA Diet, I explain how a healthy diet must include a variety of natural foods which are based on DNA. DNA-based foods are essential for health. Our body uses the genetic intelligence in natural foods to maintain balanced health. It's not just fats, proteins, carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, cofactors of digestion, etc., which maintain health. Natural foods that contain the genetic intelligence of DNA should be added to the standard list of essential nutritional components. In fact, they should be number 1. We have enjoyed a co-evolutionary relationship built up over millions of years with an interlocking biological web of natural food genetic structures. In fact, scientific studies show, well, this is a meta-analysis of 9 studies entitled Association of Vegetarian and Vegan Diets with Cardiovascular Health, an umbrella review and meta-analysis of observational studies and randomized trials. And it found very high effect sizes. A 29% risk reduction for cardiovascular disease, a 14% reduction in cardiovascular disease mortality, and a 32% reduction in heart disease mortality. One of the studies evaluated showed a significant 39% risk reduction for stroke incidence. These results imply that following a vegetarian or vegan diet is at least 10 times more effective than statins in preventing heart disease or stroke. It's 10 times. It is also of note that such diets are free of negative health side effects of statins and other approaches from modern medicine. The authors conclude very clearly that policymakers and healthcare professionals should prioritize promoting healthy diets for the prevention of cardiovascular disease. This is the herbal approach and dietary approach. But Ayurveda, as we have said, recognizes that consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. So how do we start to think about this? Well, we have control over 4 areas of our life: our food, our behavior, our experience, and our consciousness. And what we're going to be talking about here is that development of consciousness, of higher functions of consciousness, drives human evolution and preserves human health. So this is a study of 2,000 regular participants in transcendental meditation, enrolled in a health insurance scheme for 5 years, and they were compared to 600,000 members of the same health insurance carrier. The study found an 87% reduction in inpatient admissions for heart disease among the TM group, making transcendental meditation 30 times more effective than statins at preventing heart disease. 30 times. The study examined 17 different categories of health, and hospital admissions per 1,000 were lower for the TM group than the norm for all of these 17 major medical treatment categories, including 55% less for benign and malignant tumours, 30% less for infectious diseases, 30% less for mental disorders, and 87% less for diseases of the nervous system. And the thing to note here is the across-the-board improvement in health. One intervention starting to affect all of the measures of health. That is the essence of consciousness-based approach to medicine. So TM is a simple, easy, twice daily practice for 20 minutes that does not require belief. But your doctor is probably not, and well researched, but your doctor has probably not advised you to learn meditation for your health. An article in the journal Hypertension, a recent article entitled Evidence for Upgrading the Ratings for Transcendental Meditation Responses to the American Heart Association's Scientific Statement on Alternative Methods and Blood Pressure, encourages doctors to examine the evidence and upgrade their advice to patients with hypertension. Just think for a moment. According to the OECD, since 1990, the costs of modern healthcare systems are increasing dramatically, faster than the growth in economy. The result has been an incapacity to invest in healthcare along with rising individual costs that are now out of reach. A 2023 survey in the US found that healthcare has become unaffordable for more than 50% of the population, including many who are insured, forcing them to forego or delay needed care. How is this possible to affect the whole physiology with the practice of meditation? A recent study has linked long-term TM practice with beneficial changes in gene expression. So the genes are what is guiding the whole physiology, the command and control structure, and this study by Dr. John Fagan found reduced expression of genes involved in the stress response, so less stress, reduced expression of genes linked to inflammation, which is of importance in reduced incidence or severity of heart disease, arthritis, atherosclerosis, diabetes, etc. He found 19 genes linked to cardiovascular disease are altered beneficially in their regulation, and crucially, 2 tumor suppressor genes are upregulated. This shows that consciousness-based medicine can safely and effectively form the heart of a modern, cost-effective health system. Its benefits are very broad-based, and they're safe and effective. Consciousness is the fulcrum point of health. Quality adjusted life years, studied at the York University Centre of Health Economics, are an attempt to assess the relative merits of medical interventions in the modern era and diversify away from mortality rates as the main criteria of effectiveness and safety. Improvements in measures of quality of life are used to weight longevity itself. Essentially, the better you feel following a medical procedure, the more you are able to do for yourself, the more useful any added longevity will be. So the Centre has selected 45 measures of quality of life. A few years ago, I gave a lecture at the University of York Centre for Health Economics, focused on the results of scientific research on transcendental meditation as it related to these 45 criteria. I compared these criteria with the results of over 250 published research studies on the Transcendental Meditation Program. Now, we can't go into this in detail, but essentially, all of these 45 qualities showed improvement. I divided these qualities into 3 headings: mental and emotional health, physical and motor sensory, and vitality. So for each of these 45 quality of life categories, multiple research studies indicate that the transcendental meditation technique had a positive influence. Now the key here is the wide scope of the findings. This is the rest of it. This presents an example of the holistic effect of more orderly, awake consciousness on the physiology. Consciousness is simultaneously holistic and specific. Improvements in specific areas of the physiology and psychology are coupled with improvements in the physiology and psychology as a whole. In fact, the coexistence of these holistic and specific values is universal in nature. Laws of nature manage the part and the whole. Consciousness-based medicine handles the part and the whole. So can the field of consciousness become a viable, holistic entry point into public health? There is a great deal of skepticism and resistance from within the medical profession, understandably, I suppose. It's something they're just simply not trained in. Medicos ignore well-trodden paths to health, including advice about diet, exercise, lifestyle, and meditation very often, because they feel that people are hard to motivate and because they believe that lifestyle changes are difficult. Extreme scientists reject the whole notion of consciousness because they say we can't measure it. And this is nonsense. If you haven't got consciousness, how can you measure anything? They reject consciousness as a fit subject of scientific study because thoughts and feelings come and go. In other words, they say subjective introspection is too abstract and unreliable to qualify as evidence. Well, is this reasonable? To measure light, you need a sensor that can interact with light. To measure gravity, you need a sensor that interacts with gravity. To measure consciousness, you need a sensor that interacts with consciousness. Well, what's that? Consciousness is self-referral. It interacts with itself. Consciousness can know itself. This is not a concept that is foreign to science and physics in particular. Non-abelian mathematics is used to describe unified fields precisely because they interact with themselves. At its deepest level, consciousness is synonymous with self-referral consciousness. Self-referral consciousness is open to itself. It is conscious of itself. It is awake to itself. This is not the object referral consciousness which we typically experience in ordinary waking consciousness, where the awareness is overshadowed or absorbed by whatever we're paying attention to, the object of attention. Self-referral consciousness is pure consciousness, consciousness that is not overshadowed by the object. It is open to personal experience in very settled states. During personal instruction in deep meditation, the individual is taught how to systematically allow the activity of thinking to settle down in a natural and effortless way. As a result, the impact of the object of experience becomes less until the source of thought is reached, and the individual experiences self-referral consciousness, transcendental consciousness, name doesn't matter, an unbounded self-sufficient field of wakefulness free from the impact of any particular object. This is named samadhi in the Vedic literature. In more simple terms, it is a state of restful alertness. The mind is fully awake, but free from any thought activity. The body is deeply rested. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's transcendental deep meditation technique, easy to learn and effortless to practice, doesn't require belief. Over 600 research studies show that the individual practicing it becomes more alert, more creative, more intelligent, more happy and healthier. It's done twice a day for 15 to 20 minutes, morning and evening. In different terms, consciousness is not an object which can be studied like a billiard ball. The Upanishads say, neti, neti, not this, not this. Consciousness is abstract, yet its expression in human life is supported by a biofield. This is what we have discussed as consciousness as a field. This biofield is intimately linked and entwined with physiology. Like all fields, it has a ground state, a least excited pure state, known as samadhi. So, the second part of our talk about consciousness-based meditation, consciousness-based medicine. We dealt with the individual now and the wide scope of findings, and now we want to look at public health as a whole. The gene consciousness axis in the human body supports an identity which relies on genetic similarity. Does this point to not just some sort of individual consciousness field formation via the physiology, but also between organisms of the same species? The source of coherent collective behavior, such as the formations of starlings pictured here, has long been the subject of debate. How far do fields of consciousness extend? I first began to think about this because of my background in physics and because of research conducted on something known as the Maharishi effect, that throws up some huge questions about how humans form networks whose members can share common characteristics or behaviors. There have been over 118 studies of the Maharishi effect published in scientific literature to date. I completed 3 of these. Simply put, when approximately 1% of a population, 1 in 100, practices deep meditation, or the square root of 1% practices meditation in groups, morning and evening, there are measurable effects of increased orderliness in the wider population, including reduced crime, reduced conflict, and increased economic activity. I've written extensively about this in chapters 11 to 13 in my book, Your DNA Diet. So let's consider first the Maharishi effect in cities. I published a study of in Psychology, Crime and Law entitled The Maharishi Effect, a Model for Social Improvement, time series analysis of a phased transition to reduced crime in Merseyside. Merseyside is that port city of Liverpool in the UK. So here is a chart of the impact of people meditating together in Merseyside. The chart plots reported crimes per 1,000 population by month. So that's the up or x-axis. Effectively, when a group of people practicing meditation was formed, crime immediately reduced by 16%. So time series analysis, so this is along the y-axis, we have years and the figures are by month. So when that group was formed, immediately crime fell by around 16%. Time series analysis, very powerful statistical technique, shows that the certainty of a relationship between the group formation, the formation of the group of meditators, and the crime reduction is very high indeed. P less than 0.00006. Very certain. Moreover, there are other indications how certain this is. For example, crime statistics collected separately by police forces in adjacent counties showed identical effect sizes. The effect size is huge. You've got a chart here, 1987 to 1993. Merseyside went from having the highest metropolitan crime rate in the UK, so very difficult circumstances there, to having the lowest. So completely decoupled itself from the national trend. By 1993, it was 40% below the rate that would be expected from the prior trend. And in fact, following on from this, there was an absolute cascade of social improvements. And again, we don't have time to go into this, but you can find the details in my book or in the study published in Psychology, Crime and Law. Lowest crime, suicide went down, there was an economic revival, there were improvements in government, improvements in economic activity, and so on. So how do you transfer the influence of people meditating to the whole population? There's a sort of reciprocal relationship between individual and collective consciousness. The individuals create the feeling in a city, and then the collective consciousness in the city comes back and affects all the individuals. More coherent individuals enhance the orderliness and dynamism of every level of collective consciousness, and in return, an orderly collective consciousness benefits all its individual members. Well, you know, if you go to New York, there's a palpable collective consciousness. You feel it the minute you get off the plane. That's created by all the people. If the people become more orderly, the city's going to become more orderly. I first started to model this effect as a sort of radial field along the lines of gravity or electromagnetism inverse square effect. That you have this group of people here in a place called Skelmersdale in Lancashire, and radiating out. But actually, as I looked deeper into it, this kind of physical model doesn't actually translate into the data. The other studies show a more or less diffused effect, sometimes very tightly centered on one place, sometimes more spread out. So if it's not a physical field, what kind of field is it? I'm grateful to a suggestion made by Maharishi at a conference I attended in 1975 in Switzerland. Genetic similarity could be relevant to the spread of the effect. It could be described as a sort of, the Maharishi effect could be described as a sort of genetic resonance of consciousness within a biofield. So I reviewed many of the published Maharishi effect papers and realized that populations with tighter genetic links show more geographically focused effects of meditation by its members, whereas populations with greater genetic diversity have more diffused effects. For example, a meditation project among a village population in Lebanon, which had a very settled genetic generational roots, people have been living there for a long time, found a strong localized reduction in conflict intensity. Whereas the study of a meditation group in Iowa found an effect of reduced violent crime diffused throughout the USA, which has a very genetically diversified population. UK genetic studies in Merseyside, Cornwall and other places have revealed that much of the population shares definably similar genetic roots in different areas. My study showed a very strong effect of crime reduction in Merseyside driven by local participation, whereas a study in Washington, D.C. required a much larger group of meditators imported temporarily into the US capital to produce a similar effect size. So the Marshy effect is a technology to leverage the relationship between individual consciousness and collective consciousness, between individual physiology and the physiology of society. The evidence points to a biofield mediated by genetic ties. So what does this tell us about biofields? We share subtle connections with our family members and our wider community, which grow stronger over time and through the generations. These can play a cohesive role in society. While we are affected by every level of natural law, not just gravitational forces and electromagnetism, but by climate, geography, sunshine, food, the built environment, microorganisms, direct communication, information, and emotional support are all crucial. But we can also say and add that our genetic structure is closely linked to individual consciousness, and therefore our social relationships could also be modified by our genetic relationships. These relationships have historical roots. Do we move among unseen genetic ties which stem from historical events? It's an interesting idea and one that receives support from numerous cultural traditions, including the New Zealand Maori understanding, for example, of whakapapa, or the importance of ancestry. Related ideas have also been articulated by Rupert Sheldrake, for example. So we've dealt with cities, and then we want to move on and think, can this Maharshi effect benefit nations as a whole? Well, I'm going to talk about Armenia. In Armenia, large groups of people learned transcendental deep meditation, and they experienced dramatic health benefits. I was in Armenia after the earthquake in 1988, in which 25,000 people died. I was with a team teaching transcendental deep meditation to relieve trauma at the invitation of the Soviet Ministry of Health, or the then Soviet Ministry of Health. Armenia was a part of the Soviet Union. Armenia is a true Shangri-La, surrounded by snow-capped mountains, including Mount Ararat of Noah's Ark fame pictured here. Armenians are known for their long life, eating unleavened breads, yogurt, cultures, drinks, pomegranates, grapes, apricots, and fresh green herbs. And whilst there, we met with some very long-lived people indeed. In all, while we were there, 35,000 people learned to meditate in the course of our year in Armenia, during which time the freedom of the nation from the Soviet yoke finally dawned. Armenia, at that time, before the invasion of westernized culture, was a magical and fulfilling experience. The landscape is dotted with caves known to house ascetic spiritual seekers through the ages. The traditional place names were indicative of past Vedic spiritual practices. These names included Bhagavan, Vedi, for example. The hospital doctors still felt pulses in the manner of Ayurveda and prescribed herbs. Very large groups of people learn to meditate together at one time, as many as 400 in one day. I was able to observe firsthand the remarkable and mutually enriching synergy of consciousness that was generated. In nearby Georgia, a crippled man carried into the room to learn meditation walked out without assistance. At the conclusion of a large group meditation, an elderly lady confined to a wheelchair suddenly leapt from her seat and whispered in my ear, "I can walk." The profound regeneration of physiology that everyone experienced was palpable. Groups of mothers coping with family loss through the earthquake went from lamentation to laughter overnight. At Arman Films, a participant in the group of several hundred who learned on one day experienced the resolution of his problems with kidney stones during one group meditation session. There was an experience of bliss in the large auditoriums where the group checking sessions were held. They were filled with joy. The intensity of lively consciousness generated when large groups learn deep meditation indicates the central role consciousness plays in the universe. It opens up the possibility of natural national healthcare systems where beneficial health practices and routines are embedded in family life, education, and cultural traditions, and national institutions. So can whole nations be transformed in today's world? Can we have a technology of national coherence, so to speak, and a technology of national health, consciousness-based? This is a study I published in the Journal of Health and Environmental Research under the title "The Effect of Coherent Collective Consciousness on National Quality of Life and Economic Performance Indicators, an Analysis of the IMD Index of National Competitive Advantage." And this study looked in particular at New Zealand and Norway. At the time, in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a huge increase in interest in meditation in Norway and New Zealand among the general population. When I say huge, involving around 1% of the population. And that involved people particularly of my generation. And in this study, so that threshold of 1% participation was passed around 1993. And this study looked at the IMD index, which is an index of 200 indicators of quality of life, of health, of economic activity. And the study used panel regression analysis to compare the performance of New Zealand and Norway with 45 other developed countries, OECD countries. And what we found was that the scores of New Zealand and Norway rose significantly on the IMD index of of economic success and competitive advantage. The significance of this was P less than 3 times 10 to the minus 15, a huge significance. It's very hard for nations to move up this index because in order to do so, you have to have very broad-based economic and social change, which is exactly what occurred at this time when participation in meditation went ahead. In fact, you can look at the subscales there. This 200 indicators have 40 subscales, and you can look and see that New Zealand and Norway were outliers in their capacity to move up. And this was through an unprecedented, simultaneous, broad-based economic and social improvement which occurred at that time. And this affected, and again, the significance of this very high, P less than 6.5 times 10 to the minus 8. And this occurred in a very balanced way. We saw improvements in all kinds of, while this participation in meditation was there, it's not there at the moment, A lot of time has elapsed since that time when there was a burst of interest in meditation. But while it was going on, you saw these broad-based improvements in the economic, social life, in the health, industrial relations, corporate performance, and so on. So what's happening here is that consciousness has a holistic effect on every aspect of life. This is the exact opposite of war. War causes the catastrophic and rapid collapse of economic and social institutions. We're very well aware of that at this point in time. Even as it destroys individual well-being, resulting in ill health, poverty, misfortune, and suffering. The Maharishi effect is the exact opposite. It creates a rapid, broad-based, balanced transformation in the nation characterized by greater health, happiness, wealth, quality of life, peace. So consciousness is that foundational value in society. Improved consciousness, reduced stress, increase the settled orderliness of consciousness. As meditation has that effect on the whole society, you improve the situation in one giant leap forward. And the actual leverage of this is huge. We've referred to the fact that modern medicine is very expensive. It's becoming unaffordable. And in fact, the conception of genetic-based medicine, which we're being sold at the moment, really involves several highly paid geneticists and all kinds of equipment being attached to every single individual. An absolute impossibility, and more, despite even forgetting about the fact that it's going to have adverse effects associated with it. The Maharishi effect is very cost effective. It doesn't cost much to teach someone to meditate and to embed it in the educational system. In fact, looking at the study, I found that $1 spent on a program to help people learn to meditate returns more than $700 in the economy as a whole. Is this going to happen? Well, we have to think, who is ruling society and how? We tend to think of, look to the government, look to the institutions in society. But actually, the thing that is always ruling society is natural law. The sun coming up every day, the whole system of the ecology of the earth is what is setting the rhythm of life. It's what our diet is what's giving us health. It's our relationship with natural law, and the home of natural law is the whole field of self-referral consciousness, the ground state of consciousness experienced in that state of deep meditation. So our conclusions today: our identity and health rely on genetic uniformity in our trillions of cells. That is what is intimately linked with the expression of our consciousness. As long as medical research focuses on editing fundamental biochemical and genetic processes, the crisis in modern medicine and public health will grow. Consciousness is the home of all the laws of nature and the basis of health. Only a consciousness-based system of medicine can be truly holistic. If you want more information, visit the hatchardreport.com, our two websites, and globe.global. Thank you very much.